Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Canada has been so much in the news in India lately and so much in negative headlines that sometimes you are inclined to say, or you are tempted to say, I know it's facetious, that looks like Canada has become the new Pakistan for India, because it looks like every bit of hostile activity that affects India is taking place from Canada or out of Canada, because a lot of the people who might operate from Pakistan hostile to India's interests may also be rooted in Canada. And in any case, the two countries' relationship is down in the dust right now, deep in the dust. In fact, in some ways, worse than the India-Pakistan relationship, because India and Pakistan may still be having a back channel and talking there, but India-Canada, it's a full frontal diplomatic warfare. We know about the incident at the temple in Brampton, and also the arrests now, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's statement. You can see his tweet on your screens. That said, we are talking about Canada today, but we are not talking about the India-Canada problem. We are talking about the Canada-Canada problem. And what is that problem? That problem is that Justin Trudeau's government is headed for elections anytime after February, I am told, because he depends on the support of Jagmeet Singh's NDP, because otherwise he doesn't have the numbers. And looks like Jagmeet Singh and his NDP also would like to keep this government in power at least till February, because from what I understand from Canadian media, that's the minimum time needed for all the current MPs to get their pensions. Politicians, MPs, legislators everywhere have similar concerns. So just as in India, they might have concerns about pensions, benefits, housing, in Canada also there is a pension concern. So this government carries on till then, and then there will be elections, because right now, popularity-wise, also in terms of that expression I use often in the context of Dr. Manmohan Singh's second government, UPA 2, this government, Trudeau government, has also lost its Iqbal. Iqbal is very difficult to translate, but basically means the government has lost its moral authority. Now, what is it that the government is doing? It's figured out why it's unpopular. And it's unpopular because of many reasons, but the biggest reason is joblessness, inflation, housing shortage, pressure on healthcare, pressure on public transport, other services, and also the import of many conflicts from outside, some of which is playing out in Brampton right now. I've seen some commentators on the right in Canada saying that Trudeau's policies have imported other countries' quote-unquote tribal feuds into our country. Did we really need to do that? Now, tribal feuds or not, the fact is that the current tension is about immigration. All over the developed world, we've seen this in Europe, we've seen this in America. It is, for Donald Trump, the biggest issue right now in America. Immigration in Europe, country after country is falling to the right on the immigration question, and countries are tightening up their immigration. In Canada, a liberal government, Trudeau's government, which actually laid great store by immigration, in fact, not just encouraged immigration, but enabled immigration at an industrial scale. That government has made a historic U-turn. How big is that U-turn? Let me try and explain to you. As I explained to you, remember the basic fact. The basic fact is that Canada today is a population of just about 4 crores. Just about 4 crores. So if the population goes up by 1 million, just 10 lakh, 1 million in a year, it's an increase of 2.5%, right? Basically, this population was going up because birth rates are low, as they are in all developed countries. They are below replacement levels. It was only rising because of immigration. Now, immigration was going on at some pace. Then at some point, 2015, it was increased, then 18, and then 20 after the pandemic. After the pandemic, floodgates were opened. And as I see Andrew Chang, who is a very smart commentator on CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, He says that not only did the Trudeau government open the floodgates, it also took away the guardrails. What that means in this case is that earlier there were government regulations that you could not get these low-wage foreign workers if unemployment rate in a city was more, or a county was more than 6%. But at some point, Trudeau government dropped that regulation. So all over Canada, unemployment rate is higher than that. But these migrant workers or temporary workers or TWs, they've been invited in very large numbers. And where has this largest influx taken place? The largest influx, he points out, is in the food services industry. How large is that? In food services, between 2018 and now, he points out the increase in temporary workers from overseas is 5,000%. Now, what's happened as a result? There is a housing shortage. Healthcare is under pressure because people have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for attention. Canada, for all practical purposes, is a welfare state, a socialist country, very much on the Scandinavian pattern. So, health services are very much something that people, its citizens, expect from the government, but now there are long waiting lines. That has led to a resentment, and that resentment reflects in the national polling. The latest polling tells you that for the first time in Canada's history, it's a country of immigrants, and I will tell you how that came along. In a country of immigrants, more than 50% population is against immigration. That's more than a 10 percentage point increase from last year. So Trudeau is responding to that also. What is the response? The response is that permanent residencies in Canada, which last year was 485,000, it was meant to go up to 500,000 this year, remain at 500,000 next year, so on and so forth. So Canada's population would keep on going higher. That has now been radically altered. This is the mother, father, grandfather, grandparent, whatever you want to call it, of all U-turns, spectacular U-turn. And it's not as if Trump has come to power in Canada. This has been done by Justin Trudeau himself, who laid such great store by Canada being open to immigration. So what was 485,000 in this year, 2024, next year will come to 395,000. That's a 20% cut. The following year, 2026, it will come to 3.8 lakhs, a further cut, and 2027, 3.65 lakhs. Now, that is permanent residencies. That itself is very significant, whereas it was supposed to go up according to his original immigration plan. See what will happen to the other category, which is temporary workers and students, because it's a country where people think the system is easy to game. So people who go in, a lot of them go in, temporary workers in particular, but a lot of students also, because that's why many of them keep failing their exams, because they go to these sham institutions or universities, basically for their student visas, which is something that Trudeau government is now forced to crack down on. So temporary workers and students, total number allowed in 2024 was 8 lakhs. 8 lakh people. See, the base is a population of just 40 million. So 8 lakh people is a lot of people. They were allowed this year. This is being dropped. This is a much more significant drop even than what's being planned for permanent residencies. What is 8 lakh this year will become just 4,46,000 next year. That is almost a 50% fall. And what happens the year after? It will go down further. And 2027, in less than 3 years from now, what will be this number? This will just be 17,400. From 8 lakh to 17,400. Now, this is also something, all of this is very significant for India because one, as you may have seen in some of the stories we've carried, particularly the story by Shubhangi Mishra from Punjab. There's a story and there's a video. You will see the front page of the story on your screens. The video, I'm sharing both the text and the video stories with the description. Please see that the entire immigration business in Punjab, and I'm sure in Gujarat, and many other zones which contributed a bulk of these immigrants to Canada, or low-skilled or semi-skilled immigrants to Canada, that has come to a standstill, and that is now going to be wiped out if this policy continues, because it's unlikely that even if there is a change in government in Canada next year, the new government is going to reverse this policy. What this will mean is that Canada, which was adding a population of about 1.5%, 1.4%, in fact, since the pandemic, about 1.7, 1.8% every year. In fact, it's for the first time in 2023 that Canada added 1 million to its population. So its population was growing very robustly, which was so counterintuitive for a developed, quote unquote, essentially white country. That is now being reversed, and once these changes are carried out, in fact, by the year after, Canada's population will begin to decline by 0.2% every year. And what happens henceforth would depend on what immigration policies the new governments of Canada follow. Now, what does it mean for India? First of all, as I told you, this entire immigration market, a lot of it is racket. From Punjab, essentially Punjab, part a little bit Haryana, because that contagion was growing into Haryana. Also Gujarat, that will die down, because if temporary workers' numbers are being reduced so much and permanent residencies are being reduced to such a level, and also then family reunification and asylums, etc., are all being cut down, then that business will go away. So that one career option, at least in the short term, will disappear for the next 3-4 years. We don't know what happens after that, because India's immigration to Canada has surged 326%, 326% over the past decade. Also, Indian student numbers, enrollment of India's students in Canada over the past decade has gone up 5,800%. I told you the number of foreign workers hired in food industry, all the Tim Hortons in Canada, that had risen 5,000% in the past 6 years. The number of Indian students enrolling in Canada has risen 5,800% in the last decade. Now, that is a significant contribution to Canada's economy, because they pay fees. Now, a lot of them may not be bona fide students, but they are still paying fees because their families are selling their houses, land, tractors, cars, buffaloes, whatever, to get their kids into Canada. Now, that will go down because the number of student visas goes down quite radically. If you just look at the plain numbers in 2023, when Canada was allowing a lot of immigrants to come in fact, in the 3 years since the pandemic, Canada allowed 1.2 million immigrants to come in, 1.2 million permanent residencies to come in. That is a lot of addition to a small population base. And that is what led to wage decline, unemployment, because these low-skilled immigrants were willing to do low-wage, low-skilled jobs and outcompete the original population in Canada. So if in a year since the pandemic, Canada averaged about 4 lakh permanent residents in a year, 4 lakh new permanent residents in a year, India accounted for 1,39,715 of these in the year 2023. That data is according to National Foundation for American Policy. Indian students, I gave you the growth rate, the increase of 5,800% in 10 years. But today, they are a very large share of international students in Canada, with enrollments rising from 2,181 in 2080, that's 24 years ago, to 1,28,928 in 2021. In fact, that is leading to all kinds of other problems. You will see a lot of these students failing. And if you can find pictures, we'll show them to you, because there is an agitation going on with a bunch of these Indian students and temporary workers who are housed in a tented city, because they are awaiting deportation and they are protesting every day. And you can see that the radical Gurdwara elements have also taken control of this agitation, because they want to stop this deportation, because this has caused a distortion in job markets as well, because ultimately politicians respond to what might affect their votes. Now, this election is too close. Maybe Justin Trudeau's idea was to bring more and more of these immigrants who he thought will be ultimately his voters, because immigrants, at least in the first generation, tend to vote the left, the Liberals, the Labour in Britain, or Democrats in the US. by the second or third generation, if they become prosperous, as says the case in the US and in UK, many of them then swing right. We are beginning to see that in the US because polls in this data tell us that while in the last election 68% people of Indian origin said they'll vote Democrats, this time only 60% say so. So that only shows that as new generations become richer, they swing right, but as they come in, they are more likely to be voters of the left, and maybe this was his idea, opening up these floodgates. However, right now, this has boomeranged. I will share a couple of links with you from CBC. These are very interesting discussions, including one by Andrew Chang. I learned a lot from it, so thank you, Andrew Chang. But we also have to understand where Canada has come from. This Canadian Federation was set up in 1867. Until then, there were many colonial powers there, including the French. 1867 is when Canada, as we know today, came into being. 1869, because it had wide open spaces. Look at the size of Canada on your maps. Only 4 crores people, even now, just a little over Delhi's population. They decided that the way to populate the country or to create a real country out of Canada was to allow open immigration, especially in the western parts of Canada. Western parts of Canada then go towards the Pacific Ocean. So people came in from outside in large numbers. Soon enough, control started because they figured that they didn't want people coming in from all over the world. So it became selective, particularly about non-Europeans. Then, because it is looking towards the Pacific, a lot of the Chinese immigrants started coming in because they were coming on ships. There was a lot of trade. You know, Vancouver has such a large Chinese population. So 1885, Canadians came up with a new law called the Chinese Immigrant Act. That put a head tax to discourage more people from coming in. Then more policies were brought in later to control the influx of Asians and East Europeans. Increasingly, Canada's immigration policy became exclusionary, yet it was quite liberal compared to many other countries. Then we jump about 100 years. You jump about 100 years, come to 1967. This is when civil rights movement is on, and this is when Canadian liberalism is rising. Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, rises in the wake of it. He was very much a socialist enthusiast, and in the course of that change, Canada came up with a new scheme to encourage more immigration, which was based on a point system. This is a system that gave points for skills, education, language. So this was put over race and nationalities. So this started a skill-based immigration. In 1971, Canada declared itself a multicultural country. They said multiculturalism is like our ideology, and ethnic diversity is integral to national identity. In 1988, Canada also passed the Multiculturalism Act. This carried on like this, and for long periods, for the longest periods, it's the Liberals who ruled Canada, particularly in the last decade. So in 2015, to fill the labor needs, urgent labor needs, Canada started an online system called Express Entry. This Express Entry was based on a consideration that we will admit those who we were likely to integrate successfully and also meet Canada's needs. This, however, has gone wrong. You want to see how bad the housing problem in Canada is? So see once again from Andrew Chang. He says that in a developed country, it's all right, it's considered acceptable if the gap between the new houses being constructed and new people, new working age people coming into the population is 1:2. That is one new house for 2 working age people coming into the population. But then post-pandemic, so heavy was the immigration that this gap became 1:4. And that led to massive increase in house prices, see these graphics, and massive increase in rentals as well. At the same time, unemployment kept going up. Unemployment in Canada is now 6.5%. Youth unemployment is 14%. Cost of living is rising. I told you about housing, rent, public transport is congested. So Trudeau has made a self-serving, if sanctimonious statement on this, justifying this turnaround or U-turn. He says Canadians are justifiably proud of our immigration system. Immigration is vital to our future. We have to make sure that the pride in this policy is not undermined. But, very important but, and I quote again, to stabilize our population growth, to give all levels of government time to catch up, to make the necessary investments in housing, healthcare, social services to accommodate more people in future. That's why this break is being put. Opposition leader, Conservative Pierre Poilievre, as you would expect, has called it mismanagement and has also said that this government has now admitted its failure by demolishing the existing immigration policy which was working all right, because they changed it radically using the excuse of the pandemic and allowing too many people to come in. Now, this is happening, remember, this has very important implications. First of all, if you see what's happening on the streets in Brampton, we also saw some unruly activity on the streets in Toronto on Diwali night, or maybe some people said Halloween, some people said Diwali, but basically this was a lot of people who've come in who've not yet adjusted to Canadian system and society, plus don't have work to do. So this is this flotsam and jetsam who you now see becoming members of criminal gangs, indulging in getting caught in drug running, gun running. You saw this big bust in the same region, British Columbia, just the other day. Now, for such a huge bust with so many automatic weapons, in fact, this is so many automatic weapons that you could launch an insurgency in any country with this many automatic weapons and this much explosives. Forget the drugs on the one hand. Now, this is narcotics and deadly firearms, deadliest of firearms. Was only one man behind all of this? You will have to be very gullible to believe that. But the fact is that a lot of these immigrants who don't have jobs, who don't have such a great purpose in life, they've escaped from where they were, hoping to be in this great welfare state, first world country, but don't quite belong there. That is the flotsam and jetsam that you now see manning all of these syndicates and all of these gangs and carrying out this street trouble, some of which, an example of which we saw at the temple in Brampton just last night, that is Sunday night. Watching all of this, I also see on CBC Canadian Immigration Minister Mark Miller. Mark Miller is obviously asked to explain this U-turn that you allowed so many people to come in. When 1.4 million Canadians are without jobs, you allowed 240,000 temporary workers to come in. What were you thinking? And his answer is a Freudian slip, which he immediately realizes. He says, we didn't get the mix right. We didn't get the immigrants mix right, which means we got too many of these unskilled immigrants who are not fitting in the system. And then he immediately, because he knows that he's made a mistake, it's a Freudian slip, he tries to correct himself by saying, this is not to be disrespectful to any immigrant group, etc., etc., etc. So once again, Justin Trudeau's massive radical immigration policy has now turned into a massive reversal of his immigration policy. And if the idea was to get voters, to get supporters, those voters and supporters, maybe they will vote for him and Jagmeet Singh. But at the same time, they've also brought him all this trouble, not just in the streets, but also in the underworld. Who would have imagined that Canada will be seen, at least in India, as the capital of India's underworld? That's what's happened right now. And in the process, his country's relationship with India is also completely short, and that is irrespective of the Niger case. Because remember, whatever lies deeper inside the Niger case, the shooters in this case were Indians who had gone on student visas. Obviously, they were not students, and that is what the Indian side, our External Affairs Minister, has also been saying, that you are letting these people come in, giving them easy visas, and they are then easily tempted by these groups to take to crime. And that is what's happened, because even if they are hired killers, they are students, they are Indian passport holders, students who were willing to become hired killers in Canada.